Okay. Thanks for joining the session, everyone. Please feel free to place any questions in the QA chat below. One of the things that I've spoken to Sonita about is really important about engaging with the audience. We've got so much to pack in. So I'll start off by saying that I was surprised with tickets to see the director screening of Hostile. And I actually saw that at the Birmingham Max Centre in the UK in 2022. And I found it was a difficult but such a powerful watch. And the impact has stayed with me ever since. So the documentary delves in the concepts of the hostile environment, the strategy in UK immigration policy to make life so difficult for immigrants, they either leave voluntarily or they face deportation. I'm honored to introduce Sonita Gale, the independent writer, director, producer of Hostile, based in London. Storytelling is influenced by her heritage, the daughter of Indian parents who migrated from Lahore to the Punjab during the partition of India and moved into the UK in the 50s and settled in Wolverhampton, where there is a rich ethnic culture. The documentary premiered at the Raindance Film Festival in October 2021, and it received major accolades, including BAFTA, BIFA, and winning several international film festival awards. Claudia, can you please share the slides, please?
Yes, one, sorry.
No worries. And just to mention to the audience that the slides here will be shared in the resources after the conference. So So here's a slide. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Claudia. And this is a structure in terms of the information that will present back to you. To the next slide, please, Claudia. So the Hostile documentary has impact campaign goals. And this is where the audience here can help, and we'll follow up on that during the discussion. So the first is raising awareness to understand the mechanisms of injustice to trigger change and to raise awareness of the hostile environment and the effect on communities. The second is building networks. The hostile environment leaves people isolated more often than not. And this is another kind of key theme that we'll speak about. And to encourage community and connections and to support the work on advocating change. And the third one is changing policy, which is important to roll back harsh laws and connect with policymakers and utilize the documentary as a leverage for change. Next slide, please. And this is a profile of Sunita, which I began to speak about. But Sunita is also working with Geeta Gambhir, who's an Emmy-awarded filmmaker who has collaborated with some really eminent film directors in America, including Sam Pollard and Spike Lee, editor in documentaries such as If God is Willing and The Creek Don't Rise. Next slide, please. And what I'm doing here is I'm linking key quotes from the documentary to the universal barrier system in the UK public sector. And what that is, it's aiming to reduce obstacles for marginalized people to have access to support services. Next slide, please, Claudia. So we feel like we are in the ocean with nowhere to go. And this was from the international students who feature in the documentary who were homeless. Next slide, please, Claudia. And it aligns with the universal barrier about the awareness of whether a service exists at all or whether there's a phone call or a phone line for help. Next slide, please, Claudia. Waiting doesn't hurt you physically, but it tortures you mentally. And this is from Farouk and Sabah Sayer, the main interviewees who speak how it feels like to go through the citizenship process and how it impacts their family. Next slide, please, Claudia. It aligns with the universal barrier of feeling, are you feeling psychologically strong enough to take on the task? Next slide, please, Claudia. So immigration is kind of Kafkaesque. You don't know what you're doing, and then you can retrospectively be told, oh, you've been illegal all along. And this is from Gargi Bhattacharya, who's a professor of sociology at UEL, who speaks about how complicated the legal process is for citizenship. Next slide, please, Claudia. And it aligns with the comprehension skills about understanding spoken advice or content. But another thing I would also want to add in here is where people who've got English as a second language, about how often that is conflated, where people aren't deemed to be capable. Next slide, please. And this is a hostile promotion picture. So it's showing the homeless international students that we mentioned earlier. And this is where Daksha Fasani and Parish Jeffwa from the Community Kitchens Initiative applied an intervention to help at this period in time. And Claudia, if you could stop sharing your screen, please. Sonita, thank you so much for joining us as well. I know you were poorly at the start of the week. I mean, how are you?
I'm feeling better, actually, much better. I'm sorry I didn't make the beginning of the conference, but that week of rest has really helped me. So thank you so much for your support and understanding. Having COVID sucks. So, it's still out there, but, thank you for your support and understanding.
Always, always. And we got so much to pack in. So we're going to
Yeah.
try and fit as much as we can in. So we're both we're both children of migrants, and we're
Yeah.
both from the South Asian communities. So what inspired you to create this documentary to tell this really important story?
Well, I think you just said it in your question. Actually, we're both from South Asian communities, and I think coming from that community where you're first or second generation of migrant parents, it comes with a certain history, a depth of history, a breadth of history, a history that doesn't just stem from being British, but from being Indian, from being Asian, from being connected to your own motherland, which mine is India. And I think that growing up with parents that came here because of the partition of India and Pakistan, came here because they were segregated from their communities, came here to a community that didn't really recognize them as British, that recognized them as being migrants, and then growing up in a household where English wasn't our first language, where we lived in a lane where we were the only Indians on that lane, where we lived in a community where people didn't really understand anything about us. And for then us having to integrate into that community, my dad became a shopkeeper, my mom worked in the factories, the Gurdwara was like half an hour down the road. The state school was like 10 minutes. My dad's shop was like, again, half an hour up the road. So I grew up in that working class community. And it was only as an adult that I actually reflected deeply on my childhood. And it was actually COVID that made me think, wow, where I've come from and where we are right now, and how deeply grateful I was for everything that my parents did for me and my family. Because COVID shone a light on migrant communities, and it shone a huge light, not only where BAME people were being severely affected by COVID, but how people from migrant communities were really keeping our society moving. And at that point, I remembered my parents so deeply. My father working 7 days a week in the corner shop, my mom working in a factory 6 days a week, running 2 jobs, managing a household of 10 kids in a 3-bedroom house, barely being able to get the money together to support us. And yet she did. And that gave me such strength to make this film. That gave me such strength to be a voice for our community, because for so long, as you know, with our heritage, we're always in the background. We never come to the foreground because of our heritage, because of the trauma that we've experienced, because of partition. My parents were refugees, and that trauma doesn't leave you. And actually that trauma, which we now call intergenerational trauma, does spread to your children. And I feel that I held back for so long in my life. I worked in careers that allowed me to work at a desk, that allowed me to stay behind closed doors. And I never worked in the media. And Hostile gave me that opportunity to get behind the camera, to tell a story of something that I felt deeply connected to, and I still do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many things that you've mentioned, Sunita, that just resonate with me deeply.
Mm-hmm.
The fact during COVID, I was reading the public health disparity reports, and about how the inequity was that already exists in our society was exacerbated during that. And I also recall some of the questions that you were speaking to your mother about the partition and the huge amount of trauma that impacted her. And I had the same conversation with my mom speaking
Oh.
about it, and she was saying similar things about how young she was, but how she wouldn't recall it. And I know now that's trauma in terms of what was involved and the scale of what you presented here. It brought so much information to me. It was just, and it kind of leads on to speaking about such an important story to tell. I'm talking about what made you use the medium of film to be able to tell that story, because storytelling is so important in the design space because it really gives empathy to our service users. And I was also reading a book by Dr. Stuart Lawrence, and he spoke about the importance about listening to storytellers in communities and the importance that brings. I don't know if you could just add some kind of like comments on your thoughts there.
Yeah, so the importance of storytellers from communities. Now, that's very important to me because I came from a community of Sikh, Hindus, and Muslims, and white working class people, and Black people, primarily from Jamaica. That was my history until till I left home when I was 18. So to grow up in that community, you see things, you feel things, you hear things, you smell things, you taste things. You are in places where no one else would have experienced that unless they were from that community. So bringing that narrative into the medium of film from that texture and that background is so important. So I encourage anyone that comes from a community that has a story to tell to put yourself in that position, even if it's with your iPhone, even if it's with your Canon camera, whatever camera you have, as long as you can film, just do it, because no one else will see what you've seen with the eyes that you have and the upbringing that you have. And that is why I made this film. Now, why film? Film is, for me, it's Hostile was like a PhD. I mean, I did a degree, I didn't do a master's, but the breadth of the research, it was so journalistic in a way. And you kind of think to yourself, how can you put so many threads of journalism into one piece of work? But hey, you can, and you can do that with film. And the beauty of film, it's like a multimedia package. You can do it via spoken word, which was George the poet. You can do it via music, which was Nitin Sawhney. You can do it via archive. You can do it via actuality. You can do it by all of these different facets and put it into 90 minutes. So you take your audience on this journey of going from the past to the present to what the future looks like. And the future comes from your interviewees when they're giving you insight into where they think we're heading. So film is so powerful because not only is the experience of listening and learning and watching, but you're also emotionally connected to the content that you are experiencing. It's a very visceral, emotional connection. And I was so grateful. And I keep on saying that word grateful because I am so grateful. And I say, I give my thanks every day to the opportunities that I've been given. And I do not take them lightly at all. To have my film screened in the cinema with audiences that can take that emotion from the big screen with surround sound, with lighting, with color, with the vibrancy of being in a theater, and not only that, but being together as a human race, that collectiveness of sharing, of understanding, of sympathy, of inclusivity. For me, that is the beauty of film. It's not only what you make, but it's also how you deliver it. And that's what I did with Hostile. And that's why film, to me, is so important. And specifically documentary film, because you are telling a narrative of real life stories. You are telling us a story that you may not necessarily know anything about, and it teaches you an aspect of the world that you may not be connected to. Sorry.
No worries. I mean, just to say, we played the trailer of the documentary at the start of the conference, and it landed so incredibly powerfully. And it's also interesting that you mentioned Nitin Sawhney. because the album Beyond Skin in 1999, I believe, really influenced you a lot when you were growing
Yes.
up, you know, and what are your thoughts behind that, the kind of like inspiration at that time? And please take your time, you know.
Yes, sorry about this.
No worries at all.
Uh, so Beyond Skin, I mean, first of all, Nitin comes from a very similar background to me. So he's from Kent and I'm from Wolverhampton. And we're kind of similar ages. I mean, he's slightly older than me, but definitely similar history, like you and I, in terms of immigration, parents coming here. And Beyond Skin tells the story of immigration. Beyond Skin tells the story from start to finish of embedding in a society that you are unfamiliar with and how you're going to embed in that society. So Beyond Skin was with me from a child, from a young adult, and now to a kind of mature adult and a person that kind of was so taken by it. When I was making Hostile, I knew that I had to reach out to somebody like Nitin. I knew that not only because of his music, but also because of his political interests, because of
Mm,
his political beliefs, because of where he comes from, because of what he stands for. And for me, that alignment between artists, between myself and him. So initially he came on board as an interviewee, and it's when I recorded him in studio and he actually played Beyond Skin on his guitar to me. And I just was like, this is just like, I cannot believe I'm in studio with Nitin Sawhney where he's playing it on his guitar solo. No vocals, no backing singers, no other instrumentation, just him and me and my camera. So I think during that time of interviewing him, I got to know him, and and then we kind of left it at that. And then it was like, well, hey, I'd love to use your music. And then he told me about You Are, and You Are is the song that is featured at the end of the film. And then I then started having a broader conversation with him about the film in its entirety. And I went through his music, he gave me the tracks, and he said, basically, Sunita, you can actually just edit with my music and compile the story you want with the narrative that you have with my music. So he gave me a lot of freedom. And I
mhm,
think for my first film, I am so grateful to him for letting me do that, because this is a international recognized musician that has so many accolades, that has so many awards, that is so well respected. And there's a newbie coming onto the
mhm,
scene, and he's given me that freedom. And I've respected that so much today, up until today. And now we are friends, which is
mhm,
really nice. And then during the process of filming and editing, I asked him the question, would you be my exec? You've helped me so much. You've given me your music. I've interviewed you. We have the same belief system. We come from the same background. To have you as an exec would just be an honor. And he was like, yeah, sure. How do you need me? And I was like, well, could you do a Q&A at BAFTA with me? That would be the first thing. And he did. He said yes. And that first BAFTA screening was the first Q&A I'd ever done. And I was so scared. And there were about 30 people in the audience. And I thought, how am I going to keep myself together? And it went really well. And this was when Hostile was kind of not really known. This was
mhm,
really early on in the kind of BAFTA. And I just thought, there's no chance that a newbie is going to even be in the long list, because I'm just so new to this. And I was so incredibly grateful to BAFTA, to Rain Dance, for all of the festivals that recognized my work. And to be longlisted was just beyond a dream, and continues to be so. Beyond a dream, beyond a
mhm.
dream. And I'm so grateful to BAFTA. Really, I am.
Just, I mean, it's so amazing to hear. But I mean, going
Yeah.
on to the next question, we were talking about the importance of the documentary to raise awareness of the hostile environment, and
Mhm.
Daksha and Parish during the documentary really highlight the impact on the work that they're doing through their community kitchen, this kind of initiative. But it was interesting that, in terms of hearing about the documentary, because it was originally about immigration. And then the more you found out the trajectory of the film, the documentary started to change. And I saw interview with Ashley Walters quite recently, and he was talking about the series Top Boy on Netflix, and he was talking about the immigration themes which are starting to come in there. Which so you can
Yeah.
slowly see that these themes are starting to kind of like
Yeah.
catch in other kind of like popular series. But what are your thoughts in terms of addressing the challenges of awareness? Because it's something that not many people have heard of still, but although the awareness is increasing now.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. When I first started making the film, I was making a film about immigration. I was making a film about how our community were keeping society moving during a global pandemic. I knew nothing about this hostile environment to the scale that we know about it today. I was such a newbie. I was thinking immigration law, hostile environment, no recourse to public funds. Hang on a minute. This isn't a film about how migrant communities are keeping society moving during a global pandemic. This is a film about cruel government legislation and policy in the United Kingdom that is actually affecting the lives of everyday people, including mostly migrant communities from Black and Brown communities.
Mm-hmm.
So the very people I wanted to put up there as, look at these guys really helping us, were the very people that are being tortured and tormented by cruel legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really my starting point. And then I think your question about how are we going to highlight these issues? We've highlighted it in the film. We highlight it in dramas, in TV shows like Top Boy. We highlight it in news. We highlight it in conferences. We have to keep getting the stories out there. Now, we cannot rely on mainstream news to get us there. When I was researching Hostile, information was not available. I had to go to authors like Gargi, like Maya Goodfellow. I had to go to politicians like Zara Sultana, Stephen Timms. I had to go to activists like Patrick Vernon. I had to go to people to get my source. I had to go to independent news sources like Double Down News, to The Guardian to a certain extent, to Novara Media, to Baker Street. These were the places I got my information from.
Mm-hmm.
Because the mainstream, it wasn't there. So we need to keep pushing our message as strongly as possible from the grassroots up.
Mm-hmm.
We need people like you. We need people like this conference who are enabling voices to be heard from people like me, that show voices that are completely unheard in films like Hostile.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when people start listening. So there's so much work to do. And we have so much set against us, but I keep talking about people power, and it is in our hands.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot rely on governments. We cannot rely on people at the top. We cannot really rely on anyone. We've just got to do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever step we can take, whether that's small or large, whether that's with 3 people or 33 people or 3,000 people, we got to do it. Because I always say, you can be in a room with one person, but that one person can have that ripple effect that can change law and legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just got to put yourself in that room with that person at that time, and you've got to keep doing it. And that is why I toured for almost over 2 years. I was touring nonstop, public speaking. I took my film wide as possible throughout the country to get this story out there. And now it's traveled the world. It's now broadcasted everywhere. And I think that that is the important message, is that we cannot give up.
Mm-hmm.
No matter who we are, even if we're not in this field, we cannot give up. We cannot lay down, because we're not only doing it for this generation, we're doing it for future generations. And you know what? We're doing it for our ancestors, because we've come from so much. It's not just us that have got here today. Think of our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents. Now, you could be black, white, or brown. You could be anyone. Your ancestors fought for your right to be here today. And I think so much of that is forgotten about. How did they get us to this critical point in our history? Because we didn't get ourselves here. We were brought here by our ancestors. So not only just do it for us, for the future, do it for them. And I'm doing it for my parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents. I am doing it for them. and I'm doing it for my children, and I'm also doing it for everyone that is suffering from this cruel legislation and policy. And I'm going to continue to do it until one day we have a government that's inclusive, one day we have a fair immigration system, and one day we can look back and say, we worked as hard as we could to get us here. And that's why I'm not going to stop. And that's why I'm so grateful to you, Imran, and Magnify, for the people here today, for joining us, because without you guys, this wouldn't even be happening. So thank you. Thank you.
And we thank you back from us. You know, it's really so important to have you in the forum here and to listen to you. And it kind of leads on, and again, you know, and I know we're coming up towards the end of the discussion because I know we want some audience questions to be presented back to you. But you were talking about, like, you know, the people power, you know, about that collaboration. And the theme of collaboration is so strong in your documentary because there is so many eminent people that appear in your documentary. And just to go through a few of them, I mean, Stephen Timms, MP, about raising the awareness of the impact of no recourse for public funds to the then Prime Minister, who wasn't aware of it. You know, Patrick Vernon, who was also at the Mac Centre in 2022. Nitin Soni, which you've already discussed. And you also got the hip hop artist Low Key, who follows a lot of your social networking, you know, your platforms. Could you kind of share some of that collaboration and that people power experience, which of course really adds momentum to your documentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, as a filmmaker, you know, the people within the documentary, then they are participants, but they're also collaborators. They're all equally involved in creating this film, and I always feel like I'm kind of a portal that's transmitting this and letting this happen. But this film isn't mine. I might be the director, but this was a creation of a lot of people, not just the people that are in the film, but the editor, the cameraman. So the whole team, we collaborated so profoundly on this. And I think that when you see that as a starting point, that actually this is a collaboration. Filmmaking, creating stories is a collaboration between everybody involved. You then have the power of story. And I think people like Stephen Timms, you know, he was an interviewee in the film. I literally just reached out to him because of his work on no recourse to public funds. When I saw that video, I was shocked in a way that our then Prime Minister didn't know what no recourse to public funds was. And so Stephen and I went on this journey together where, again, he was an interviewee. I then followed his work on NRPF. I then followed him within the film with the highs and lows that he was faced with. And then also this YouTube video ended up in the film because I wanted to show that actually the very government that are putting through this legislation and law really don't have a clue about what they are doing. And that came across so powerfully in the documentary. And then you have Patrick Vernon, who was involved with the Windrush scandal. And the Windrush scandal happened in 2017. People that came here legally and lawfully during the time of the Windrush were then told 50, 60 years later that they were no longer deemed lawful, that they were illegal and that they didn't have the correct documentation, and they were told to go home. And this was a man who was an activist, who was an author, who was working tirelessly to try and get support for those people that are affected by the Windrush scandal. And as you could see, Paulette Wilson was in my film, and also Anthony Bryan, and there was a drama made about him called Sitting in Limbo, which you all need to see. And these people were suffering really from this cruel, illegal law that was put in place, which was the Windrush scandal. And then we have people like, you know, Dr. Maya Goodfellow, that wrote a book called The Hostile Environment, as a collaborator, that came on tour with me as well and did a Q&A with me. And it just goes on. And I feel that having people like that within your film, it's not just about having the face of them, it's about having the voice of them. It's about having their story, and it's about having their impact. What are they doing to try and overturn this cruel, illegal immigration policy? And I think we've got to that point today with the Rwanda policy being deemed as unlawful. Thank you very much. And I think that now we can see this government for what it really is and for what it's trying to create. And that hostility, unfortunately, has got worse since the documentary. But with this today, and with hopefully things changing in the future with the government that we'll have in, we might start seeing a fairer immigration system, which is what the people in the film are all fighting for. Whether you're a person like Farouk or Anthony, who's actually suffering at the hands of immigration law, or you have people like Patrick and Stephen, who are actually at the coalface trying to change immigration law, or you have Nitin Sawhney that not only makes music, and his current album is called Immigrants, which was made 20 years after Beyond Skin. Please listen to that album. It's again about the hostility that we're faced in this country, not just with hostile environment policies, but people that are from different communities like the trans community. He is putting himself out there. So we have all these people in the documentary that are still working tirelessly to overcome hostility within our country. And I think the more we get their voices out there, the more we support them, the more that we'll hope to see a transformation in our society. I can only feel that that's going to happen, because otherwise we will be defeated. Otherwise we will be beaten. And I'm not prepared to be defeated and beaten. I'm afraid our ancestors had to face that, and I will not do it for them, and I will not do it for my children and their future. So I'm standing here fighting for the good of society, for a better society, because we are proud to be British, because we are inclusive, because we are racially tolerant, because we want a fair immigration system. We want to be seen as a country that supports immigration and a country that is inclusive, not a country that's hostile or racist. And I do not want to be seen as that country. So let's do this together, and let's support each other, and let's have a country that we're proud of, for God's sake, you know? And I think that's where we want to head. That's the government that we want. That's where we want to be seen. And it's not just about being seen, being heard. It's about actions. It's about doing the right thing. You know, there was a famous quote by somebody that I read recently. I take less attention from what people say. I just watch what they do. This is about action. This is about putting things in place that are going to work for the better future of our society. And that means fair immigration law. And that means less austerity. That means a fair welfare system. That means a fair system where we do not see child poverty on the scale that we see it today. This isn't just about immigration law. This is about the widening society, about everybody that is suffering right now, and how we can make society fair for everybody. And that's what I would like to see. People from any culture, any community, any color, we need to make this society fairer for all. And that's what I am fighting for, really. And my work will speak those volumes. You know, I will go into those communities, and I will show what is happening, and I will show to people the cruelty of systems in our country, because that is only when change can happen, is when people can see in with their eyes, hear with their ears, feel with their emotion, shit, this is not on, and we're not going to accept this, and we want to change this. And so I will continue to work in documentary to show these stories, to make people feel uncomfortable, and for people to see what is happening in our society so that we can make it better. That's what I want to do.
And I'm sure I could speak on behalf of the audience that we will continue to support you in terms of what you're delivering, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with you. But just to before we go to the audience questions, I mean, it's great to hear that the documentary is playing around the world. You know, it's playing in US, Norway, Australia, most recently in Japan as well.
Yeah.
It goes to the start of the discussion. You know, we were speaking about the campaign goals, and we were mentioning how can the audience help to raise that awareness and help you deliver those campaign goals. What would you say to that in terms of how we can support you to go further?
Well, if you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Hostile Doc, you can look at our website, hostiledocumentary.com. But I think have a conversation with anyone about this over dinner, you know, in a coffee shop. Just start the conversation around the hostile environment. Raise awareness your own way within your community, grassroots. Speak up, speak out, stand up, and organize. That's all I say. Organize yourselves. Get your community together, help each other, support your local food bank, support your local community, go beyond that, spread your wings, talk to people. You know, for me, I live in a community where I support the local community, but I go beyond that community where the work I do here reaches out. And I think the more we support, the more we care, the more we have empathy for people that don't have experiences that we have. When you're on the bus, when you're on the tube, and you're sat next to somebody, they might be suffering from this. So it's like, hey, how are you? The amount of times now I stop and speak to homeless people is I want to know, I want to learn, I want to understand, I want to help, you know. And so it's about helping each other, love for one another, supporting each other. Those that have, give. Those that don't have, reach out, ask, I need your support. So it's all about giving up your time, giving up your energy, giving up your resources for the better of society. And that's what I intend to do. That's what I am doing. That's what I have done. If Hostel can teach me anything, it can teach me that, God, how lucky I am. And Sonita, you've got so much work to do. Where were you for 45 years of your life? Where were you? Step up. Step up, Sonita. Start doing more. And I have. have done more, and I continue to do more. I'm now doing more work in charity, in foundation work, in supporting organizations that help people within asylum and refugee systems. I help organizations that work in this space. I also work in education. I'm doing so much more now than I've ever done. And I feel that beyond my film, that is my responsibility. I have to do this. I want to do this. So it's just that. It's just being a better citizen. And I'm speaking to myself. I have worked hard to become that. And I have got so much more work to do, Imran. I'm just at the start of my self-development in terms of where I feel I need to be. And in the next 5-10 years, I want to reach my goals of ultimately being that humanitarian that listens, learns, and loves, that wants to give, not take, that wants to have a better society. And that's what I want, genuinely. And so I'm going to work to those goals, and I'm going to continue to do the work that I'm doing, which is beyond my film, which I love doing. And I'm loving working with, you know, in this space. And I'm loving being able to have access to organizations like the Refugee Council, you know, like JCWI, like people like Zoe Gardner and Patrick Vernon and Stephen Timms, and even my participants like Farouk and Daksha and Parish and, you know, Anthony. We're all in touch. We see each other, you know, 2-3 years on, we're still hanging out. Natalie Barnes, you know, we're all a family. We've created this family. And so that's my goal, to continue to create that beyond the film. And so please, everyone, if you can do your bit, I would really appreciate that. So that's what I'm doing.
I mean, it's so inspiring to hear. And I think I've got one of those challenges because I've got so many questions coming to my head. And so
That's
I
okay.
wish we really had more time. And, you know, we talk
Yeah.
about, you know, the scandal of Windrush and the landing cards being destroyed. All this is like hugely, hugely impactful. But I think what
Yeah.
we'll do now is that I know Claudia's going to come in. We'll start presenting some of the questions from the audience because there's so many that we have.
Yeah.
So Claudia, I don't know whether you can come in now in terms of presenting some of those
Yeah, of
questions.
course. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. That was really powerful. So one of the questions is, it's incredible that you've done all of this as a new filmmaker. It can be a challenge, especially when from an excluded group. I know so many people that deal with imposter syndrome. How did you take on such a big project and keep momentum?
That's a really good question. I think COVID really was the catalyst of making this film. I think if we hadn't had COVID, and that we hadn't had to lock down into our homes, into our minds, into our communities, into being really reflective, which happened to me, then I had the energy and the space to create and to be creative. I wouldn't have made this film. So COVID, for all of its bad stuff, for me, it made me creative. And so that's one thing. And I found this very tough. I found the whole experience of making the film very tough because not only about the subject matter, there wasn't any industry support. So I couldn't raise any money. I didn't really understand anything about filmmaking in terms of directing. So I had to really learn along the way. So I kind of asked friends and family to help me, people within the industry to support me, directors that I knew to guide me. I kind of reached out to people, and then I created a bubble, a team of people that really could support me on this journey. And as I say, this film wasn't just my film, it was our film. We made this collectively together. We made this as a team. And, you know, I am extremely into detail. So at times I'm a real pain in the bum when we're actually writing essays and research where we go into such detail. So I identified that that part of me I'm working on, like, to be so into detail is an extraordinary talent, but it also can drive people mad. So I had to work on that, and I'm learning to work on that as a human being. So it was extremely difficult because at the same time, I have some issues with reading and writing, and, you know, being able to write things by hand, I struggle with. Being able to read things in depth, I struggled with. So I had to process information in a way that was more sensory. It was about listening. It was about colors. It was about audio. It was about reading things in big font. It was about formalizing ideas in a structure that were like mind maps so that I could actually see things through. So there was a way in which I had to work as well. So with no financing, with no experience as a director, with creating a small team of just genius people that I'm forever grateful to, including my associate producer, Raghav, who has been with me for many years, this was the team of people that made Hostile. And I think that against all of that came a film that was really quite special, but it was a lot of work. We worked 6 days a week, sometimes 12 to 15-hour days. I remember coming back from the edit at 6 and then watching the cut of the film after dinner, and then going to bed at 2 a.m. and then waking up at 6 a.m., talking to my exec producer and giving notes on the cut that I watched the night before. And we did that for about 20 weeks. Imagine, I watched a cut of the film every single night. I then gave my notes in the morning to the editor. At the same time, we were writing essays. At the same time, we were researching immigration law. So my editor, Alex, was just given so much information. And then I had an amazing script editor who just gave me that ability to kind of open my mind to this story. And then I had my lovely exec producers that were just there to support me. And then I had my lovely researchers and rags, and it just goes on and on and on. And then even the cameraman, you know, setting up my shots, you know, the lighting. I think this would be great to get the story here. And it was kind of like advising me, and I kind of took it all in, and I kind of listened and learned and kind of absorbed everything. But then here goes. I really actually learned a lot about myself, that it was like, well, actually, I think we should do it this way. So I had the power of strengthening my voice to say, actually, let's try this. And I realized that I wasn't scared by doing that, but a lot of it was listening and learning. And I guess that's the beauty of making your first film, right? You can make a lot of mistakes and you can learn from them. So I'm going to take all of that experience into my next film and try somehow to get financing from the get-go, to try somehow to make a film that where we don't have to work 15-hour days for no money, where we're actually working for money, and we can work 9-hour days, and we can have a life outside the film. Because to work like that was really painful, and I wouldn't want to put my team through that again. So, you know, I'm hoping with the next film, it is made in a way that I actually can have a life outside the film. Because for, you know, maybe a year and a half, you know, my life was the film, and that is important also. But I also have a family, and I feel that that's important equally. So it's about a balancing act. And so I'm hoping with all this wealth of experience, whoever, and please, whoever is out there can finance my film, will come on board the industry to support me, because I do want to make films. But I can't make it without having the finance for my next film, because I had to rely on 3 individuals to finance Hostile. And as much as they wanted to, it wouldn't be something that would be available for me in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sonita.
Mm-hmm.
Claudia, is there time for one more question? I know we
Can
can
we
look
do
to...
one more question?
I'm around, so I'm
So,
happy to kind of stick around
yeah,
and take.
okay.
I'm
Yeah,
around to take a couple of
okay.
questions. I don't want people to be left without their question's been answered.
Okay, yeah,
Thank
we
you.
have one more question. So Dan says, fantastic interview, thank you. Question for Sonita. Can we take hope from two major political events this week as any glimmer that the hostile environment will one day end? Or is it more noise amongst ever-growing hostility?
Can we take hope, or is it more noise amongst ever-grown hostility? Okay, so I think the hope we can take from the last few days is that Suella Braverman has been sacked. The hope we can take is that this has exposed the current arrangement, the current government, as being so disconnected within their cabinet, as not having a clear idea about their strategy and structure around immigration law. I think what this has highlighted is that the Rwanda policy has been deemed unlawful. Therefore, your immigration law, in parts, is unlawful because you need to review that. I think what this has highlighted is that people, and the protests that we saw at the weekend, where they're saying that 300,000 people came out because of Palestine. I think it was more like 500,000. We are seeing the rise in people power. People are saying no, and they are fighting back peacefully with protests. Now, when you have the Nationality and Borders Act, the police bill, the Rwanda policy, it just goes on and on and on. All this restrictive law and legislation and policy, it is just screaming out hostility. But here goes. People aren't accepting it. We're not accepting it. And I think people are waking up and realizing that the crap that we were fed when we were campaigning, when they were campaigning for Brexit, David Cameron, and people look back on that and think, wow, we were really cheated. We were really cheated and we were really lied to. And throughout this process of filmmaking, I've had people come to me saying, thank you so much for making this film. We voted Brexit and we are so sorry. And I was like, thank you for being honest. We make mistakes. So I think what we're seeing is hope. And I think we need to continue with that. We need to go out, peacefully protest. We need to do what we're doing to push this narrative, because what we're seeing now is we're seeing people running our country that really don't have a clue what they're doing. And I think this is an opportunity for us to change our future and change the language, change the narrative. So yes, it might seem to be that we're caught up in this hostility, that we're in this downward spiral path. But hey, out of that comes a reshuffle in government. People are being brought back in who were made lords to have that privilege and opportunity to be in that seat, where we're looking at that and thinking, wow, the godfather of austerity is back. How does that really work for us? Doesn't, does it? So we are now formulating our opinions based on the B crap that we've been fed over the last 10 years or so. So people, we need to start pushing back, and we need to make a decision, because we are voters. We have the right to have the right people. Now, I'm not just saying a changing government's going to do it. We need a government that has proper, fair system that's going to drive our country in the direction that the people want it to be. And that's when people power come into it. We need people to continue to raise their voices, to continue to speak out. And once we have that, then we might be looking back in 10 years' time and think, yes, we felt like we're in a very dark moment in history, but we've come out of it, and we've come out of it stronger. So let's go with that, and let's work on that, and let's hope that's our future. Because I have to be positive, because I made a film that highlighted so much negativity in our society. But that is why I focused at the ending on people power, because throughout the whole time I filmed Hostile, I felt this wave of people power. And it started not only with George Floyd and what happened there with Black Lives Matter, it started way before that, but we could see it, and I could feel it, and I could hear it. And that's continued throughout the whole of my screenings, when there are people in the room that are fighting me because of this, but then come out crying because they regretted what they did. This is when mindsets are being changed. People are changing. And I feel that we need to focus on that change and that positivity to drive our society. And that's where I'm landing. So, yeah, let's continue with that notion. But thank you for a very good question. I've never been asked that before. Thank you.
Well,
That's all the
Sonita,
questions, Imran, so you can wrap up.
oh, thank you. I mean, it just goes in terms of the start of the discussion, speaking about how much of an honor it is to
Mhm.
to interview, and I just wanted to add to kind of like close how much of a privilege it is to hear, what you're saying, and the huge inspiration that you have in terms of continuing that fight, and you see the kind of emotion that's starting to come in, because
Yeah.
these are the words that we all want to hear, and it's that
Yeah.
collective, and it goes back in terms of like that collaboration about how important it is as people as we continue to be able to do what's right. And I just wanted to end by just saying it's thank you
Mm.
so much for your time. It's
Thank
such a
you.
rewarding discussion, and I
Oh,
hope that we could do this again sometime. It would be
I would
absolutely
love
brilliant.
to. Oh, thank you, Magnify. Thank you, Imran. Thank you, the whole team. And thank you for the audience for coming here. I really appreciate it today. So good luck with everything. And I would definitely love to come back in the future. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Thanks everyone. Cheers.